Welcome to the Patriot Perspective. I'm here, Gregory Lykov, joined with Ofer Dar.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to August 23rd's edition of the Patriot Perspective.
And we apologize for not posting in the last week. We had some traveling to do to regions of the world that are currently under immense pressure on I'm not going to specify the exact region, but you guys can, as our viewership can come up with it. Hopefully there will be peace. Hopefully there will be peace. That's all we hope for. Today we have a lot on the table, but just to mention as a start off, this week has been great. I have, discussed several of my articles that I published and several of the interviews that I've conducted on the show with people in the team of Ken Paxton, specifically the former Assistant Attorney General for Ken Paxton and also the former head prosecutor for the Texas Election Fraud Division, as well as the chief of staff in Ken Paxton's unit. Hopefully, we will have Ken Paxton on this show later in the next few weeks, but no promises yet. Aside from that, it's been hectic. It's been really busy, but Ofer, I know you had a crazy week too. So why don't you tell our viewership without being very specific about what you actually were doing and your content that you posted in the last few weeks?
No, that's fine. We could say I was in Georgia. I was pretty close to the Russian border. Georgia is a wonderful country. I guess like the coolest thing I noticed is that there's a huge bottleneck when it comes to infrastructure. Georgia is very important. It's like at a crossroads between Iran and Azerbaijan, and like a lot of trucks pass through there. So now Chinese workers are being sent in to build a new tunnel that goes under the mountains directly into Russia. So that's a huge initiative that's being developed. So there is now this like new effort to increase Russian soft power in Georgia while they're losing power in Armenia and Azerbaijan. But that's neither here nor there. I want to ask you about your entire discussion with Ken Paxton's team. I want to know what specifically, which issues were discussed because there's a couple of major scandals unfolding in Texas right now. Obviously, we talked about Jay Furman and all the shenanigans associated with his opponent and the way in which he claims the election was rigged. And then also the fact that Ken Paxton can't even open up independent voter fraud investigations because his ability to do so is encumbered by the fact that he needs approval from a district attorney. So just tell me what you discussed and what are the
Yeah.
solutions going forward.
Yeah, definitely. So first off, the big thing we discussed is Jay Furman's and Henry Cuellar's election in the 2024 congressional election for District 28 of Texas. And over there, we saw that there was obvious voter fraud being committed. His name didn't appear on the ballots. And I told the whole story. We'll link it down below. We have an interview with Jay Furman relating to it. And that, that election fraud story was actually brought to light with my conversation. It was pretty much confirmed that there was an election, that there was some type of election fraud being taken place. But the interesting thing I heard from the former prosecuting attorney for election fraud in Texas, the thing I heard is that this is a very common thing, especially among border counties and border towns. In Texas, almost everything is corrupt. We saw that in Frio County, which is right next to Webb County, where the Furman and Cuellar election took place. We saw that in Frio County, 15 Democrats just a few weeks ago got arrested for ballot harvesting and some other election fraud things. And actually, when Ken Paxton's team was doing a raid on these Democrats, he was criticized by outlets including the New York Times, the Washington Post, every other, liberal outlet. He was criticized for doing these raids because they saw it as political persecution. But when they actually find that 15 Democrats committed election fraud, every outlet stays silent, and probably none of our viewers even heard of this. So obviously, there's a big deal behind this. There's a big deal that 15 Democrats in Frio County got arrested. They included the district judge, the county judge. It was a huge deal. And hearing all of this and understanding this really points to the fact that there's not a lot of power given to the Attorney General of Texas because the Court of Appeals in Texas actually ruled that the Attorney General did not have the power to prosecute and investigate cases. He only had the ability to prosecute cases after the DA, district attorney, referred that specific case to him, meaning that the district attorney would have to refer a specific election fraud case before Ken Paxton actually went out and investigated it. The issue with that, which is quite obvious, is that when the district attorney is corrupt, no one's reporting the case. So that's what's happening in Texas. This is why there's such a big amount of voter fraud that is not being prosecuted and that can't be prosecuted simply because it's ingrained from within. And as we all know, Ken Paxton very recently announced his campaign for Senate, mostly because, according to him at least, he believes in term limits for Attorney General, so he wants to try something new. I wonder who will replace him. There's a lot of names in the picture, but really his job as Attorney General was wonderful, and seeing him in the Senate would be, another wonderful thing. If we had Paxton and Cruz from Texas, that would be a powerful team for conservatives all around the country.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And this situation relating to voter fraud, you talked about, for instance, ballot harvesting, it's further compounded by mail-in ballots. That's a huge issue right now that Trump has resurfaced in a recent Truth Social post. So we know how in 2020, for instance, we had this entire phenomenon called the Red Mirage, wherein initially you had like the people that actually physically went to vote that largely voted Republican, and then over time, as the ballots came in from people that did so by mail, eventually Biden was able to flip swing states and win the election. And so since
43%.
then, yeah,
43%
yeah.
of those ballots, yeah. It's insane.
Mhm. Yeah, so that there's been a huge emphasis, there was at the time by the swing states to change the election laws in order to allow anybody, quite literally anybody, to send in a mail-in ballot. Beforehand, there were absentee ballots, which is something that you receive an exemption for instance, if you're in the military or if you have some sort of medical condition that prevents you from going to a polling station. And so now Trump's trying to just reverse the wrongs of that 2020 election and he's trying to just permanently get rid of it. So I want to know what you think of his initiative. Like, is it realistic? And is he talking about just mail-in ballots, like as a whole for everybody, or is he also talking about absentee ballots?
Yeah, so this is like the million-dollar question. I just finished writing, and it's being published hopefully later today, an article in the Gateway Pundit about this exact issue, whether we should ban mail-in ballots or universal mail-in ballots. And I also yesterday spoke about it. You know this, but I spoke about it with Charlie Kirk. So we have a pretty shared opinion on this, and I'll just summarize it in, a few sentences. And that's it's not realistic to say that, okay, we're going to stop having mail-in ballots or we're going to stop having absentee ballots. It's not realistic. The liberal states would never agree to that, and even members of Congress that are Republican would never agree to that. It is realistic to take small steps. So, for example, Utah a few months ago banned universal mail-in voting, which is mail-in voting, which is a pretty big deal. But we want states like Michigan, which in particular has a huge history of mail-in voter fraud, huge. I'm sure a lot of viewers just saw there were two councilmen that were caught stuffing ballots in Michigan. A ridiculous story, but all of this kind of adds up to say that mail-in voting is obviously where most of the election fraud takes place. We had states like Texas, though, being able to deal with this. Texas now has the least amount of voter fraud in mail-in ballots, and it's almost all now in the electronic voting systems. That's where we see almost all of the uh, corruption there. But we want other states to take it, like New York, California, swing states, Michigan. So that would be a big step. And I think Trump shedding light on this issue is important, but we want to see actual action take place. But Ofer, I wanted to ask you, what do you think Trump can do about it? Because it's very easy to say, okay, we should ban mail-in voting or we should make it illegal, but what can we actually do?
Well, yeah, you sort of hinted at it. It has to be done through federal legislative Congress, even Republicans may not support that. So I don't know how realistic it is on a federal level for Trump to be able to pass a bill uh, like they're passing it. So then all the red states, they're gonna have that ability to ban it. But that's the problem that in liberal states that perhaps you're looking at the House districts that may be contested over there, but you have like a Democrat governor and a Democrat legislature. That's where it's going to be a huge issue because you're going to have Republican districts or swing state districts in the states that could be influenced by the fact that mail-in voting remains. And then same thing with swing states. Like Michigan right now is led by Gretchen Whitmer, who is a Democrat, but it's a swing state. And so
She's
she
actually
ultimately has dominion over the states. It's a huge issue. And it's not just her. It's like there's a whole load of swing states that have Democrat governors or like Democrat legislatures in the House or the state senates. So it has to be a state six in order to allow this to happen. So the rules can be changed. But up until then, it's going to be a huge issue, and it should at least be attempted through the federal mechanisms. But I'm just not confident that it's going to work.
Yeah, I agree with you. And just to say, the Michigan governor, there's a lot of rumors of her potential run in the 2028 presidential election. I actually just watched a Ben Shapiro video on this, where he ranked her like third most likely or fourth most likely to run, which is insane. I'm pretty sure his ranking was like number one AOC, number two was who was number two? Bernie Sanders.
It's got to be Gavin Newsom number one, like the
No, Gavin
best.
Newsom was number three on this poll. That's the most insane thing.
Well,
Do
that's
I
weird.
believe that? No, obviously not. But the thing is that Gavin Newsom, uh, I think there's a lot of talk within the Democrat Party of him running, but he's not really unique compared to any other politician. That's the issue. So he's trying to make himself unique in that he's fighting Trump on immigration, he's fighting Trump on all those other issues, but I want to see something that makes him more unique before I say, okay, he's definitely going to be the nominee. It's though looking like he is by far in the lead, and then AOC is behind him, and then Pete Buttigieg, I believe, is number three.
Yeah, he's also there.
Pete, though, is never going to win, unfortunately. Uh, I don't know if you heard, but do you know about the story of his hatred for the beaches on Long Island?
That's so weird. Why would he have any connection? He was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and the transportation secretary because he liked to play with toy cars when he was a toddler. So explain to
So,
me. I don't
so
know.
to explain to you, the person who built Long Island and built most of New York City infrastructure was a man named Robert Moses. You probably know him from the
Yeah,
beach,
yeah.
Robert Moses Beach, and he was
Mhm.
a genius. He built up basically everything we know. And there was this entire rumor, basically a book like this published, almost exactly like this. I forgot the name of it, but by some random liberal scholar that's a progressive, what you know what I'm talking about. So it was published, and it was basically a criticism of Robert Moses and his racist ideologies and policies. So one of the criticisms in that book, one of the biggest, was that the parkways and the roads leading up to Jones Beach, they all had short bridges. And that was, according to the book,
Oh,
for the
yeah.
purpose that African Americans who were the primary bus takers, they had to take buses, and Robert Moses didn't want them to fit under the bridge. This
Oh
entire
my
thing
God.
was debunked. It's the stupidest thing I ever heard of in my life. First off, white people were the primary people uh, taking what's it called uh public transportation and buses. Number
Yeah,
two,
buses. Yeah.
the entire reason the buses were still able to go through a route, but they were able to only go through a route through a neighborhood. They had to like cover a neighborhood. And if you know anything about buses, you know that the whole point
Mm,
of a bus is that they stop through neighborhoods. That's why a bus is a bus. And they don't just take you from point A to point B, because that wouldn't be a bus, that would be an Uber.
yeah.
So it's completely debunked. Stupidest thing I ever heard. But Pete Buttigieg, big supporter of that. I'm pretty sure he even visited one time New York beaches to make a press conference about this. It's complete nonsense, but that's my favorite
Yeah. And
thing.
despite that fact, he has 0% black supports. Like all the pandering didn't work. He's just
Of
so
course. It
uncharismatic.
just came out like a Newsweek poll, I'm pretty sure, right? Just came
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
He had 0% support. His diversity agenda is mostly, aided by the fact that he is a part of the LGBTQIA queer plus community, uh, which he talks about way too much. But look, he's a schmuck. If he wins, it's going to be quite funny. But okay, moving.
Yeah. I doubt it.
Yeah, I too. I think it's going to be either Gavin Newsom or AOC. Mean, I wonder who the VP is though. That would be crazy.
It could be Wes Moore, the
Yeah, but
governor
he's
of
not very
Maryland.
known. He's not very known. I mean, like even from New York, which is what Maryland is pretty close to New York. He is not
Mm.
like a very known person in New York either. So I don't know. He's getting a lot of like more uh a lot of more publicity now, but I don't know. His job in Maryland though, he's not doing a horrible job, so he's not
Mhm.
like crazy. But we'll only have to wait and see. But if you guys want my bets for the Republican nominee are going to be JD Vance is going to be the next president of the United States, and Marco Rubio would be the next vice president. In my opinion, the most powerful team ever made by any other, president in modern day history. I'm so excited to see that. What are your thoughts though? Who do you think is going to be next?
Yeah, I mean, I want to sound unique, but like I can't. Like I literally agree with that 100%. Like it's
Yeah,
Trump signed off on it already. It's gonna be Vance and Rubio.
it's going to be the most insane thing I ever saw. I think that Vance and Rubio are the two smartest people in the entire Trump administration. Uh, Tulsi Gabbard is also pretty smart, but really Vance and Rubio like heroes in my books. But
Mhm.
it's insane. JD Vance went from someone who was not known like 4 years ago to someone who now is about to be the president of the United States. It's crazy. But yeah, now to transition our discussion back to the mail-in voter fraud. Ofer, I wanted to ask you your perspective uh, on the entire situation in liberal states, not about the mail-in voter fraud, I mean the gerrymandering. How
Yeah.
liberal states currently are gerrymandering to compete with Texas. What do you think is going to happen out of this, and is this going to turn into an entire war, and how can we prevent it from happening?
Yeah, it looks like it's a race to the bottom. Like each state's going to continue escalating. It started with Texas and then Gavin Newsom passing the California legislature, another one that basically like flipped 5 seats, I think, or maybe even more to the Democrat side. And now you have Florida doing it, Ohio doing it, Indiana, and now maybe Illinois and even New York can join in on it. So basically, what we're seeing is a bifurcation where all the minority parties in each state are going to lose their power and representation that they had. So, like, if you have 40% of the support in a certain state, then you're going to get like 20% to 10% of the allocation. And that's if you're lucky, because if you're a small state like Delaware or Vermont, then there are only one or two or three congressional districts, and then you basically get zero representation in Congress. So I think it's horrible. I
Yeah,
really hope that every single side, like, because this is all about power, and I understand that. But as an ideal, what should be happening is something that's way more proportional, something that keeps in mind the fact that each state does have at least a third of support for the minority party, whether it be Republican or Democrat. Even in Wyoming, for instance, the most Republican states, 33 or 35% of the state is still Democrat. Like those people still deserve representation. So within the context of the size of the state and the way in which like the rural urban divide is like in play, there should be a way to like increase representation across the board. But obviously nobody's going to do that while we're in this sort of war. So
yeah.
I'm just very disappointed about it.
Yeah, and in my opinion, again, gerrymandering is the scariest part of our entire country because it is the biggest threat to our country. We are not a democracy. We are a representative. Uh, we are not a democracy or a representative of the country. We are meant to be a democratic republic or a republican federal republic. So the most important thing here is that we have equal representation to an extent. And in general, gerrymandering is something every single state does. The way Texas did it is no different than the way New York does it. New York gerrymandered to the point where it gets almost no Republican representation now. So it's not very surprising. What I would like to see though is people like Gavin Newsom, for example, if he starts gerrymandering, then I would consider it like an all-out war with him. And that's when we begin to continue like to, I don't know, like you can send the National Guard to LA, I don't care. But Trump is not going to be happy with him. Like Gavin Newsom has been trying to take a moderate stance as a Democrat. If he starts gerrymandering again, that's going to be a big deal. It's really going to be bad. And he's not focused on cleaning up the homelessness, cleaning up the well, actually, that's not true. He is focused on that when Mr. President from China comes. But it's just so disappointing. But over now to transition to our next topic and the reason why I actually have this book with me, um, called, if you can't
Critical race
see,
theory. It's
Critical
it's
Race
blurred,
Theory.
but it's called critical race theory.
An Introduction. I don't know if our readers ever heard of this phrase before. It's by Richard Delgado. He's a scholar, to say the least, and the developer of critical race theory. So there's a lot of misconceptions with critical race theory, especially in relation to the current situation with the Smithsonian Review. Donald Trump has recently launched. So, Ofer, why don't you give me a little bit of a rundown of what critical race theory is so our viewers can understand, what we're actually discussing?
Well, critical race theory, if you look at like the philosophical underpinnings, it comes from a long list of people from the Frankfurt School. Like these are these post-World War II liberal philosophers that looked at what happened with the Nazis and thought that there needs to be like a change in like our sort of perception of how we deal with democracy, and we need to like exclude people from democracy that can harm democracy. It's basically like the open society paradox. Like you have to stop people from within ruining your democracy. So it started from there, and you had all of these like postmodernist thinkers like Foucault and de Beauvoir, people that were questioning institutions, questioning power structures, and it reached a point where you have these black thinkers in the 70s, especially like Angela Davis and these sort of people that were questioning the hierarchy between whites and blacks, questioning whether race is even real and whether it's just a social construct created by white people to put down black people. And then you have the newest generation of like the 2000s, 2010s of like Richard Delgado and Ibram X. Kendi, and they're the dumbest of all the previous ones. Like the previous ones were very smart. I don't agree with them, but this next generation is stupid, really stupid. And
Well,
so
Oprah, just to clarify a little bit, previously before Richard Delgado, the entire basis of critical race theory was not called critical race theory. It was more in
mhm.
affirmative
Critical theory, yeah.
action. Uh, what did you say? Sorry.
It comes from the broader umbrella of critical theory, which is critical
Critical
of
theory,
all
yes,
power
yes.
structures, including
And
gender, sex, etc.
yeah, and also what else was there? Oh, diversity, equity, and inclusion. So
Yeah.
all of this kind of is a stemming, like all of this is the same thing. Now we call it critical race theory, but the name did not come until, I don't know, the 2001, I think, which is when actually this book was released. Sorry
Yeah,
to interrupt.
so just to get to today, what they're talking about is the fact that like there's this concept of whiteness in that it's used to like put down black people, that there are disparities that it necessarily prove that there's discrimination going on. Basically, they want to create this equity states where everybody is completely equal in terms of their outcomes rather than their opportunities. So whenever they see a gap between two groups, they immediately ascribe malice or some sort of discrimination from the past as being an explanation rather than wide context or certain behaviors by groups. Like they never have accountability for their own actions. So I'm very opposed to that entire ideological school.
Good to hear. I wasn't sure if you were, but
Yeah.
just to show you a little bit of what whiteness is according to the critical race theorists themselves, I want to just quickly take a moment and share my screen to this. Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
So this was my post recently, where I share a very interesting poster that unfortunately everyone stole from me. Literally, the entire Republican base stole from me. That's fine. Um, so this is what I would like to bring up. So we see that a work ethic, a Protestant um, work ethic is hard work is the key to success, work before play. If you don't meet your goals, you didn't work hard enough. Apparently, that's a white culture thing. We also see that the scientific method is white culture. We see that cause and effect relationships is a white culture ideology. I guess black people don't believe in it. I don't know. Let's move pages. This is where it gets exciting, okay? Um, okay. This is my favorite part. Based on Christian religions, Christianity is the norm. That is a white culture relation, uh, according to this chart. But let me just remind you that Christianity is the number one most practiced religion in the Western world right now, and by far most of its practitioners are not white. They actually come from
Mhm.
Africa and different parts.
Yeah.
So this is very interesting. we see that wealth equals worth is a white ideology. I mean, I don't think it's a white ideology. I don't think it's an ideology, period. Following rigid schedules is a white ideology too. So, school, I guess, waking up at 8 a.m. is a white ideology. I wonder what my teacher would say to that. If I say, no, no, thank you. I don't want to follow a rigid schedule. It's a white ideology. How about tomorrow will be better? That's a white ideology. Plan for the future is a white ideology. So, my point being is that there is clearly a misconception of what white ideology and white culture is because if you are telling me that that is white culture and that only white people subscribe to it and that other racists don't believe in it or should reject it, if you're telling me that, then that's inherently racist towards the other races because these are cultures and these are values that everyone should agree with. Hard work is
Yeah.
the key to success. Yes, that is a value that whether you're white, black, gray or green, you should agree with it. It's common sense. But what critical race theory does in general is it says that, okay, if white people are more successful than black people, then there has to be a reason to that because white people have to be segregating black people. There has to be a racial reason. The thing
Yeah.
is that this claim doesn't add up when we look at other groups. For example, Jewish people or Asian people. Those are the groups I bring up. Asian people are currently the richest in the entire country based on racial demographics. They make around $90,000 $94,000 a year in median income when the average American makes 39,000. So massive difference, almost double, more than double. And uh, and still, according to them, that is is that a racial difference? Like, are Asian people given more opportunities? Obviously not. They were excluded from our country. They were sent into camps. They were not even allowed to marry white people in many states for decades. So why are they doing better? Answer to this is because they got reparations. That's not true. They did not get reparations. Japanese Americans got reparations if they were sent to a concentration camp, but that was not nearly all Asian Americans. Then there's the point about Jewish people. So, Ofer, I'm going to start off by asking you this. Can you give me a little bit of a rundown of the oppression Jewish people face throughout the world and if there was actually oppression that took place or if it's all a hoax? I just don't know. Can you maybe give us a rundown?
I mean, yeah, if you look through history, and then we'll go to the United States, but throughout, especially the medieval period, what you had was a situation where you had these feudal monarchies and you had small principalities, and they had restrictions on money lending because they couldn't practice usury. They couldn't charge interest to, various satrapies or their armies or any sort of group that they were in alliance with. So then they recruited Jews to do that sort of middleman job. And that's what Jews have been known for throughout the centuries, those mediation jobs, whether it be something in banks and finance, sometimes even in legal fields. Even at the time, they were involved in that, but especially when it comes to lending out money and charging interest for it. And so, on the one hand, that put Jews in a very powerful position because they controlled the money supply to a large degree. And at the same time, it caused hatred because then, whenever there was an issue going on in a certain kingdom, the king could blame the moneylenders and the people that are running the banks for the situation and then sort of direct the anger towards them. Looking at the United States, when Jews initially like immigrated to a significant degree, it was around the late 19th century. There were periods of immigration before, but the major immigration wave came from the Russian Jews that escaped the pogroms in the late 19th century. Beforehand, there were some Germans that also left. But you had over a million coming in during that time period. And initially, they did not have a strong economic background because the ones in Russia came from the Pale of Settlement. Basically, they put them in this sort of concentrated area in Western Russia where they were not afforded the same opportunities. They couldn't really farm. A lot of them were merchants, basically, and that's how they made their money. And so then they left all of their possessions behind and they were destitute going to the United States. So initially, they were also redlined to a certain degree. And redlining is a huge issue that Black people mention because they say that they were districted in certain areas where they couldn't receive like good and proper loan deals for mortgages and such. And so they claim that they were always at this sort of disadvantage because of redlining. But obviously, that's not true because you look at examples like Jews or Croatians that also were discriminated against based on redlining, and their socioeconomic situation today is much better than that of Black people. So that's not the full story. But yeah, Jews were initially redlined at the time. They had caps on the amount of admissions to elite universities that they can basically get into because too many of them were making it in based on like the regular criteria. So there were caps put on. Obviously, by the 20s, like the 1920s, that's when the restrictions got loosened. But at the same time, there was a ban on Jewish immigration at the time, I think it was Coolidge or Hoover that was president at
Yeah.
the time. And then Jewish immigration really restarted once again after World War II and the Hart-Celler Act in 1965. And that's when you had like this whole new wave of immigration. Again, Asian immigrants started to come in and they obviously outperformed their black counterparts, the Asians from China, because you look at like the first Asians that came to the United States, they were in the mid 18th, 19th century living in California, people that came in to build the railroad and help with the gold mines, and they were Chinese, and they were also redlined. They also were separated in many ways, but nonetheless, today their economic situation is far better than that of black people. And actually, a funny thing is to finish off is that the standing of black Caribbeans, people that come from, the Dominican Republic or from other nations in the Caribbean, is far better than that of African Americans. So immigrants coming from the Caribbean, their outcomes are much better. Even those of Nigerians coming to the United States in recent years is much better than those of African Americans. So systemic racism, it just falls flat in its face when you compare it to like various other groups. And yes, a lot of it is as a result of just cultural differences when you compare the regimen. And it's sort of funny because they talk about it in the Smithsonian graphic about like the white culture. Everybody should be embracing that because that's the key to success.
Whoa, are you telling me that you're putting white culture on everyone? Is that what you're telling me?
Well, that's what should be the standard, yeah. If that's what they call white culture, then sure, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And this is not racist or anything. This is common sense. And
Yeah.
to add on to your point, uh, a lot of people don't understand this, but FDR, which is proclaimed to be the best president ever in history, according to the left, was obvious terrible president. I mean, aside from the fact that he was packing the Supreme Court, he completely ruined our country by introducing a level of bureaucracy that was never seen before and unprecedented. Um, he also did not allow Jews to come into the United States right before the Holocaust when it was obvious when they were already put into ghettos by the by the Nazis, and most Jews were turned away. There were literal ships that came in to immigrate to the United States filled with European Jews. They were turned away, sent back, and those people died. Personally, my family, part of it on my dad's side actually was one of those ships that,
Wow.
but they managed to get deferred to Canada, so that's how they got in. But this was a big issue, a huge issue, and FDR was in the center of it. Obviously, the Holocaust happened, in which a third of the entire Jewish population got killed and genocided, and still. After the third of our population got genocided, somehow Jews are still one of the most successful demographics and own 1.1% of the entire world's wealth, among them, while making up less than 0.002% of the population. So it's pretty impressive, okay? And it's definitely not because we had any advantage beforehand. And later on, there were programs that actually allowed Soviet Jews to come into the United States if they were facing prosecution. That's how my parents got here. And I'm sure if your grandparents immigrated here, that's how they got here too. Um, but those that's how a lot of people like Jewish people or Asian people got here. And the fact is that we did not face any less oppression than African Americans. Obviously, I don't believe in comparing tragedies, but no one had an advantage over the other. So it's a real culture issue when you see that black households, 64% of them don't have fathers, or when you see that they don't value education as much, or aren't involved in schools as much as other races. That's where what everything stems from. Just the father point, 64% of African American households not having a father, or only 24% being in wedlock, which means having a marriage, or waiting until marriage to have a baby. Like those are
Yeah.
steps that are like proven in society to advance your chances of becoming successful. When you don't have a father, you're more likely to be incarcerated. You're less likely to have an influence over what you do. Or even if you have a father that's in jail, you're influenced by that. So it's very scary and it's a very serious culture issue. I
Yeah.
actually believe that there is an element of past oppression and past oppression of African Americans in American society that contributes to the issue. It's part of the reason. It's a small part of the reason why African Americans are at a disadvantage, same as part of the reason why Jews are at a disadvantage is the Holocaust, because when you have your entire family lineage wiped up, then you're obviously at some sort of disadvantage. But it is not comparable to the disadvantage that is posed by a culture thing. And yes, that culture could have stemmed from the fact that, I don't know, education wasn't valued and African Americans had to steal in the 1900s. I don't know. But that may have been considered then, but that's not systemic racism. It's not because of racism today, it's because of culture. That's the main issue, and people have to understand that.
Yeah. So there's this really interesting study that compared free black people, so black people that lived in the North before the Civil War. So they were not slaves, their ancestors were not slaves either. And so they lived pretty much a normal life. Yes, there was segregation, but for the purpose of the study, it doesn't really matter because they were getting compared to Southern blacks who were slaves. And they compared the differences in their generational wealth after slavery was ended in 1965, or in 1865 rather, and they saw that the differences between the northern blacks and the southern blacks completely were diminished and basically nullified within 2 generations. So even though the black people in the north had an advantage going in because they were enslaved and they had employment, their generational wealth was completely evaporated within 2 generations. So by the time that their grandchildren were alive, there was no difference between a black person living in the north and one living in the south. So that again points to the fact that there
To an
is this
extent.
huge cultural issue.
Of course, like the thing that people are gonna argue is that still, if you
Mhm.
lived in the North, obviously you were at an advantage, but still there is racism, obviously all of that stuff, and that's
Yeah,
true. Jim Crow laws, all of that. Like that to an extent that is true. Obviously, no African American lived a good life that they should have during those times. But I think the point is that every single group in history has faced some sort of oppression. And every single group in history has had some sort of disadvantage over another group. So it's very difficult to say that one group should do better than the other. If I
yeah,
have a disability, for example, if I have, I don't know, autism, does that mean that I get things that you get? Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's
yeah.
differences in everyone. And like some people are born with inherent differences and or inherent disadvantages. Obviously, I am very privileged compared to someone who's born in a household where I don't know, they don't their mother goes to work 24/7. They live in a very poor community, obviously. But the whole entire point is that differences don't mean that there is discrimination. That's a separate conversation. Discrimination is not an equivalent to differences. And that's really what the basis of critical race theory doesn't understand. And that's why I picked up this book to actually prove that in a research paper. And I'm very excited to
Mhm.
read this. Um, but anyways, I love critical race theory. I think it's very interesting to talk about. I love discussing it and everything. Actually, don't quote me on that. I do not love critical race
Yeah,
theory.
don't take it out of context. We can
Yeah.
clip that. It's very
Yeah, Charlie
dangerous.
Kirk's gonna see that. He's not gonna be happy.
Yeah.
And but yeah, look, Ofer, we have I've gone on many tangents today. I think it's time to wrap up. But yeah,
Mhm.
we're very excited to be back on the show, back to discussions. We have a lot of interviews lined up. Uh Actually a few more that I have to tell Ofer about. But yeah, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and yeah, see you later on the Patriot Perspective.